This is the beginning of our next phone conversation. We had agreed last time that we would read through Romans chapters 3 to 6 together, and surprisingly, she not only agreed to it, but followed through. So we started with some general conversation about which translations each of us were using. She, of course, uses only the New World Translation and believes it to be the most accurate and modern translation available, because that's what the Watchtower tells her. I was using the New American Standard Bible, which she's not familiar with. They actually do have the American Standard Bible on their website, though I doubt JWs ever even look at it. I think in this part of the conversation, because she's only aware of that one, she kept on assuming it's what I was using. That one is an older translation that of course uses older English. As far as I can tell, JWs are trained to believe that there's only a small number of English translations available, including the King James Version, the American Standard, and the Living Bible. And they are aware of the NIV as well. Beyond that, I don't think they really know or want to know about the other more accurate modern translations that Christians use, like the NASB, the ESV, or the NKJV. So I tried to explain a bit about that here, but I suspect she wasn't really listening because her goal was to teach me what the Bible says.
Yeah, so you wanted to talk about is it Romans 4, was it 3 to 6 or 4 to 6?
3 to 6.
3 to 6.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I thought maybe we could do, if it works for you, kind of do a little bit like we've done before and just kind of go through, just walk kind of through verse by verse a little bit here and there and maybe compare, because I think we have a little bit of differences in our translations, probably not a whole lot, but
yeah,
just
the wording translation, should be can be taken into account, but the thought should be the same, shouldn't it?
Yeah, I think so, pretty much. I think I kind of tried to look up a few different areas, and there were some slight variations, but overall, yeah, I didn't see too much. There was a little bit, like I think, like we talked about before, I think the New World Translation does some paraphrasing here and there. That like the translation I use is more word for word, so it can come across a bit differently.
The New World Translation is modern English, and
mine is too. Yeah.
A lot of we're not the only ones. Like the Jerusalem Bible is very modern, which is a Catholic translation, and there's another one. It slipped my mind which one it is, but it is very, very, very modern. It uses all the modern day latest words.
Oh, sure, yeah, and the New American Standard does as well, but
they
really focus
but the thought
on.
Isn't changed when you.
Yeah, but my point being that there's different standards of translation, and some use more of a there's thought for thought or word for word, and then there's also paraphrasing things, and so you get something like
if you translate in Hebrew from word to word, if you put it in English, it wouldn't make sense.
Oh yeah,
word for word.
Yeah, and that's the whole point of translation.
That's why you have to add like would or here or something like that.
Sure. Yeah, and that's just basic translation.
To connect the two phrases to make sense.
But when you get a paraphrase, they're actually they're going beyond that even in places like if I don't know, I think you've seen like the New Living. I think you guys have some reference to it on your website.
Yeah, there's a New Living Bible.
Yeah, that's a total paraphrase, right? Like that's not even, they're not even looking at thought for thought or word for word translation. They're doing a paraphrase, so that's more of a human written, it's kind of
they're putting their slant on it.
Totally, yeah. So that's what I mean. That's quite different. Like the New American Standard kind of does the opposite of that, and they really focus on what the actual words are. Yes, they have to put it in English grammar format so that we can read it in English. But
and of course, there's quite a few years difference in time between the revised editions and the New Living Bible. There is about 100 years difference. So grammar has changed in that time. So the Living Bible is using modern
Oh yeah, no,
grammar.
the New American Standard is actually, it's quite new. It's not a Old English or anything like that. It's quite new, so that's not a
But it's
problem.
still about, it's at least 80, 90 years old in
No,
translation.
the New American Standard? No, no, no.
Isn't it?
Oh no.
No,
I think it was.
not, I haven't looked into them. We use those scriptures a lot, and using in our literature to show that different Bibles are saying the same thing, but I haven't researched as to, or I haven't, I've probably read it, but when it was written, but
Okay. Well, I'm just looking.
I don't remember.
I'm just looking
You know
in the
what I
front of. Yeah, I'm just looking in the front of mine, and it says copyright 2006. So it's the New American Standard officially. There was the American Standard,
which was updated in 2006.
Yeah. So so the New American Standard.
Revised means updated. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's well, the New American Standard is actually not exactly the same as the American Standard. It's definitely a different new revision. And then as language has changed, it started in 1960, and then it's gone through many different, little tweaks here and there to update to the language. And so now we're at 2006 is the most recent one.
Yeah, it's the same with our New World Translation. It came out first of all the first one came out in 55, in about 50.
Yeah.
And then there was another one that was revised and first of all it was in Greek, just the Greek scriptures. Then of course the Hebrew scriptures were added, and then the Greek scriptures were tweaked more for modern English.
Right.
And in 62, and then in 2013, we had the latest tweaks.
Okay.
So that's the history of the New World Translation.
Yeah. Okay. So kind of along similar timelines as the New American Standard. So.
Yeah. So we can do that.
Okay. So what we kind of did before with John 1, maybe there are certain areas we can kind of where I can read a portion and then you can read it in yours and we can compare and.
Yeah, it's good to do. Perhaps would you think it a good idea to before we start that, just just back up and to the beginning of Romans and what was the gist of that letter that Paul wrote?
Yeah, that's a great idea.
To the Romans. So that, because that colors the rest of Romans, doesn't it?
Absolutely, yeah, and it's actually really, I've been thinking about that too. Like, I don't know if we're going to get through all 4 chapters today because there's a lot to talk about.
Yeah.
But, so even if we split this up,
it's your schedule. If you start feeling tired, let me know.
Okay, and same for you too. But I was thinking that too, like even like if you've been going through like I have and you get to chapter 6, it's really hard to stop at chapter 6 because it just carries right on.
Oh, that's what I like. It's a good thing I'm alone because I can get into reading and then I look at the clock and it's 10 o'clock in the morning and then I look later and it's 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Exactly, yeah, it just goes and suddenly like, whoa, where did the day go? But that, and Romans is so deep and it is such a long flowing thought all the way through that. So then
you do agree that what we should look at at the gist of what Paul was writing to the Romans about.
Yeah.
And get a little bit of background history.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you interpret his letter to the Romans?
Well, so Paul is writing to give them apostolic writing because they haven't had that yet, right? Like we figured, I was just looking a bit into the history of the Roman Church and why was Paul writing this letter. And it wasn't, with some of his letters to other churches, it was to correct them on false doctrine. That's not what he was writing to the Romans about. He was writing them because they were already an established church, probably by some of the people who were saved at Pentecost and then went back to Rome. And so he's giving them sound doctrine and gospel about the nature of man and the nature of God, the nature of salvation.
And who in particular was he writing to in
the church in Rome?
Who was he addressing particularly? Yeah.
Well, the church in Rome.
When we're talking about the church.
Right, and we can look at some evidence there that because he does reference quite a bit from the Hebrew scriptures, that he would have been speaking with both Jews and Gentiles.
Yeah.
So this was a church of.
Yeah,
so he's talking a lot about.
As we read there, he was particularly talking to the to the Jewish Christians, because of course in chapter 1 he was referring to that it wasn't. He was encouraging not to think more highly of themselves than the Greek-speaking.
Right. Yeah.
Because they were all one.
Yeah.
Although he did concede to them. He said that they did have a right if they felt that way because the truth was first established in the Jewish church.
Yeah. Yeah, so and that's exactly where we pick up in 3.
That they had superiority over because of that, then they were thinking wrongly.
Right. Yeah, he really knocks that down and says we're the same.
So we agree then that he was speaking to the Romans, but he was predominantly correcting the Jewish Christians to be all one with the new proselytes. By that time, of course, they weren't proselytes anymore because they weren't being circumcised; they were Christians, right?
Right. Yeah, and there actually may well have been, especially by that time, more than just proselytes, but also, just Greeks who had never been to the temple or anything, but had heard the gospel and were saved and joined the church. If you've been following along with these videos, you may remember some time ago a point when she shared that she believes the Gentiles had to become proselytes in order to join Christian congregations. I think we can hear a bit more of that same mindset here. As far as I can tell, that whole idea comes from the Watchtower's twisting of Scripture that contrasts the law with the gospel. They teach that the law just refers to the Old Testament temple practices, not the Decalogue. That's how they convince their followers that works are how they save themselves, as opposed to what scriptures actually say. That's why I wanted to go through these chapters in Romans with her. They so clearly show us that Christians are saved by faith, not by works. So
and Romans too, because this was
exactly
because he was writing to the Romans that some had embraced Christianity that weren't proselytes.
Oh sure, yeah, and so
because
I'm sure
the word had spread.
So you could really say 3 groups then, right? So you could say the people that came out of Judaism and the people that were proselytes,
and then
also the Gentiles.
At Romans chapter 1 and verse 7, he speaks of holy ones. Mm-hmm. All those who are in Rome as God's beloved ones, called to be holy ones.
Yes.
So he's addressing those.
Right.
He's addressing the holy ones.
Right. Absolutely.
So who are the holy ones?
Christians.
Maybe that's the first thing that we should establish.
Yep, definitely. So he's writing. Well, he's writing to the church. He's writing to the Christians.
But he's specifically writing to holy ones.
Yeah, exactly.
Naming holy ones. So he's also, because he also in his letter, when he gives greetings in other letters, he mentions holy ones, and then he mentions other greetings to other people too. So there's two classes of people there.
Well,
that he's speaking to.
I don't see any 2 classes though. He's just saying he's writing to them, and the letter was to be read to all of them.
He's writing to all of them. Yeah, I agree with you there. Excuse me. But he's including the 2 different categories. See what I mean?
But there aren't any categories in what he says here.
No.
He's just simply saying he's writing to the holy ones. Do you need to get a glass of water, maybe?
I've got to get a glass of water.
Oh, good. Okay. That happens to me sometimes too. It's not fun.
Yeah.
So
there's no like when I say classes, I'm not referring to like a lower class and a higher class. I'm just
really. Clearly what she's trying to teach is from Rutherford's 2-class system that he invented in 1935. She is told that anywhere in the New Testament that references holy ones or saints, it means a special higher class of anointed Christians, the literal 144,000. Their two-class system very much does have a higher and a lower class. But they will often try to downplay that, as if it's really more of a blessing to be part of the earthly lower class than the heavenly higher class. And I can see why they accept this. They're taught that the literal 144,000 are basically supposed to be political leaders sitting up there far away from all their friends and family for all of eternity. They make it sound dull and boring and really pretty lonely. They don't get to enjoy all the fun of frolicking on the new paradise earth. With that kind of teaching, no wonder they don't even want to go to heaven. There is absolutely no focus on what the true paradise, true glory, true heaven really is, which is living in the joyous, amazing, glorious presence of Jehovah himself and getting to enjoy him forever.
It's referring to two different requirements of the people.
Yeah, well, and the only two classes you could really see would be the Jews and Gentiles, and he spends so much of the book saying that actually there was just the one class, we're united.
Well, if we read, turn to John.
Let's not get too. I do recognize that cross-referencing is important, but I think we want to be careful. We haven't even gotten into the first chapter here yet, so I don't want to get too far away from this.
That clarifies, though, that there are two different groups. Jesus talks about two groups. That there was other sheep, and then he refers to other people.
Sure, of course, the Jews and the Gentiles, just like he's talking about here.
No, those weren't Jews or Gentiles.
Well, they certainly would have understood it that way, wouldn't they? We talked about that before.
Not in John.
Mm-hmm.
Not in the letter to John.
Especially in John's letter, yeah.
That refers to the holy ones, and what are the holy ones?
The saints, the Christians.
So there wouldn't be two different classes because there's Greek holy ones and Roman holy ones, right?
Well, there's Jewish and Gentile. I haven't heard different Greek and Roman separations.
Yeah, so the Gentiles were the Greeks.
Oh, yeah. You said Greek and Roman, but Romans are Gentiles.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Greeks and Jews.
That threw me off a little bit. Okay. Yeah, so exactly. So that's the little flock would be obviously all the way through. And we talked about this before, and we seem to be in agreement on it, that the little flock would have to be the Jews, and then the other sheep are the Gentiles being grafted in and created into one flock, right? And isn't that exactly what Paul's doing here in Romans?
Well, then you see who then are the kings and priests that it all has to the whole thing has to make a complete picture. So who are the kings and priests that will rule with Christ Jesus? Aren't they the holy ones? Because they're spoken of in Daniel as holy ones, and they're being kings and priests, which means that they would be wearing a crown. And Revelation reveals that too.
Yeah, sure. And those are Christians, but let's be careful not to get into a literalistic view of taking something that's from a different book that's not related to what we're actually discussing here. Let's try to get into what chapter 3. Let's maybe focus on getting into what's actually written here. Can we? Because I think we've sort of got an idea of where we're coming from. So if we kind of move into like even with chapter 1 and chapter 2, what we see is we're looking at the depravity of man, right? The sinfulness of man, and God turning them over to their degrading passions. And that's the bad news, right? This is the state of humanity, both Jew and Greek. And then when we get into chapter 2, then we're looking at there is no partiality with God again. So we've got that joining together. And then we've got, the law written in the hearts, like in verse 15. And then when it gets into verses 22 and 23, we're talking about the moral law, the 10 Commandments. And then he goes into circumcision and the circumcision of the heart in verse 29. So he's really talking about that all are under the law, regardless of whether they come from the Jewish history where they had the Ten Commandments, they had the law there, or whether they're a part of pagan nations where they haven't had access to that kind of information. They still have the law written on their hearts, and it's those that are in Him are the ones who they're in Him because they become Christians because they're circumcised of the heart, right? They're not living just an outward sign or doing some physical work to make it look like they're God's people.
They're doing it out of love, not out of necessity.
Right. They have the heart of flesh now, so they're doing it in love. So that's where we start with, and I think that's it's awesome that you brought that up, because and when we start into chapter 3, then we start with, then what advantage has the Jew? And then if we didn't know anything about what came previously, then we might not understand.
I just totally disagree. I totally agree with you in that, because I'm not trying to make that this doesn't apply to us, because I'm saying it applies only to the holy ones, because what applies to the holy ones applies to everybody, because Jesus says that the two would be one flock and one shepherd, which means that they would have to obey the laws of love, which is the law of Christ. So this applies to us too, and I agree with you.
Okay, well then we don't need to worry about that too much if we're recognizing that it does apply to all Christians. Mm-hmm. Okay. We'll start right here next time as we begin reading through Romans chapter 3.